It's my pleasure to introduce Susan Schoenbeck, and I'm so excited to introduce her because she's a nurse. Yes, she's a nurse. And what does she do as a nurse? She teaches other nurses. She teaches people to be nurses in an academic setting. She's been in nursing for a long time. That's what you get to know, a long time. And she's been a critical care nurse, yay, us ICU people, and now she's in med-surg. So other than that, she's going to talk to us about the language of grief, and so you get to hear the rest of her story. So please help me welcome Susan.
How many of you have had out-of-body experiences? How many of you had near-death experiences? I was really happy to see on your tags all the people that did. How many believe that near-death experiences are real? Then you're the group I'm supposed to be talking to, just checking. I'm going to talk about near-death experiences, edge-of-death talks as people are dying, and also how to console the grieving. You are the people who really have the knowledge to be able to help people who grieve. The world doesn't stop because we need time to grieve. Death sometimes is the only thing that brings to a halt our frenetic pace of daily activity. Death makes us stand still and contemplate the reason for our being and our circumstances in life. Death shakes our world upside down as it snatches a loved one away. Death makes us question. Death makes us cry. Experiences with death haunt some people. The nearness of death tortures others. Nothing is more painful than the sense of loss we feel when someone we love dies. The pain of grief is really unimaginable for those people who have not experienced such a loss. Although death has been around just about as long as life has, less is well known about the process of dying. When properly guided, knowledge of the near-death experience can change those who grieve, from people who have lost to people who have found. Here's where you fit in the picture. You can make what you know about the transcendent visible. What you know about the near-death experience can touch the heart and the soul of people who grieve. I know these things because I am a nurse, and I've cared for people at the precipice of death. Dying patients talk to me. I've done research with people who have had near-death experience, and I've counseled those who've suffered loss. Today I'm going to walk you through how it came to be that I actually used the near-death experience, the words of the dying, and the emotions of the loved ones left behind to build a language of grief. I'm going to give that language to you so you can console, you can support, and you can bring people beyond the Kubler-Ross model. You'll learn the words so that you have the words to say. You will be able to describe the near-death experience characteristics that change our perception of death from being a final event to one in which remembering and communicating with loved ones who have died actually makes sense. You will learn what the dying say when they're crossing over. You will hear how the light bulb went off in my head and I began to reveal the facts of near-death experience and the words of the dying to console people. Together we will look at daily meditations that help us process grief in a good way. We will share affirmations that make us grow in awareness of the people we are and also who we want to be. We in this room can alleviate suffering. We can shed some light. We can lead to what I call post-death growth. To quote the big guy again, Albert Einstein said that knowledge is wonderful, but wrapping our imagination around knowledge and creating something new with it, that's even better. So follow along as we do that in the next hour. I have been conscious of my spirit form for as long as I remember. I had polio as an infant. When my body experienced excruciating pain, my spirit moved out of it to a place above where I was conscious. I had a body form and I had a spirit form. I believe my body form let go of my spirit form for good cause. The reason was my spirit form experienced no pain. While my body was laying in a bed with a big steel brace on it so heavy that I couldn't roll over, I would find myself floating above the bed. My consciousness was with the spirit form above the bed. I was looking down at my body form in the bed. My spirit form again registered no pain. Was some part of my brain responsible for helping me go from my body form to my spirit form? Maybe so. I can vividly remember one experience when I was a grade school Girl Scout. We made wicker plant baskets for our mothers. This was the most special thing I had ever made. A greater task, though, for a child with polio is how to carry it home. It was heavy and it was big, so I could not see well in front of me. My legs hurt. I dreaded falling with the present. I knew that every one of my steps had to be good, no stumbling. Then suddenly I found myself high up, looking down at my body, carrying the present and walking home. I saw that I was with an angel who was floating with me. I was carried all the way to my home porch. And at that point, like that, I popped back into my body. The present was intact. Before many of my out-of-body experiences, I hear an aura. An aura is a sensory warning that something's going to happen. My aura is a pleasant ringing sound. As a child, when I would hear that ringing sound, I knew I would be leaving my body and the pain that it had. I was not afraid. I was never afraid as a child when this happened. The movement of my consciousness, its changing places from body form to spirit form, came instantaneously. Then I did not know what I know now, that people who have seizures, migraine headaches, also have auras. Auras may be a sensory sound that they hear, a scent, or visual disturbances. Whatever disease the aura is for, it acts as a warning system. If something horrible is going to happen, like pain or seizures, the body warns itself, get ready because trouble is coming. Now you probably are thinking, can she do this while she's standing there? I am not able to consciously choose to go out of my body. I've tried, I admit I've tried a lot. I could be experiencing intractable pain that has lasted for days, and still, I'm not able to consciously choose to exit. Even though at these times I know my body would get welcome pain relief, this is not how the system works. We know that the sympathetic nervous system responds to threatening situations with a fight or a flight reaction. Extreme pain would be such a situation. The business of consciousness, what we perceive when we're in our body versus what we perceive when we're in our spirit, then may be manned by the sympathetic nervous system. Certainly I found the brain did not need to make any decision about it. The sympathetic nervous system may be the spark and the fuel that makes consciousness able to move from body form to spirit form. I realize I have been fortunate to clearly understand that I am both a body and a spirit. In ancient times, it was a common part of training for priesthood that the candidates would be given psychedelic drugs that placed them in edge-of-death encounters. They wanted the priest to, go over the edge, almost die. And then the priests would know there were both a body form and a spirit form. What a good lesson for a priest, right? But they don't tell us how in ancient times, how many of these guys actually came back. It's often a mystery to us how we know that we believe in things. Beliefs are like guests that come up to your door. They knock on your door. It takes you to let them in. Maybe that's why you're here today, to get the words, the language of grief, to console those left behind when a loved one dies. Let me tell you how out-of-body experiences affected my nursing practice and serendipitously my counseling of those who grieve. My nursing practice started in a cardiovascular ICU. In other words, the patients there had open heart surgery. Many times their hearts, irritated by all the poking and prodding that goes on in surgery, stopped. We did cardiopulmonary resuscitation and brought the patients back to life. One particular time, a patient told me she had been out of her body watching me while I was doing the CPR. She said she was above the scene. She saw other nurses come and help me. She was able to describe the scene. She was able to tell me what was said, who was there. She reported that, same as me, she didn't try to go out of her body. She just did go out of her body. Other nurses poked fun at me for believing the patient. Some said, oh, well, Sue, she probably made this up. It was a dream to make her feel like she was okay after a life-threatening event. Okay. Several others thought maybe she just wasn't getting enough blood. So her brain caused a phantom belief that she was separated from her body. Still others were really straight with me and said, Sue, this doesn't exist. You're wrong. You have no proof. Frankly, when I teach this subject, I tell people that I don't actually care what the physiological or psychological rationale underlying a person having a near-death experience might be. Just as having an out-of-body experience is real to me, near-death events are real to those who experience them. As a nurse, it is that person's world I must enter in order to help them. In nursing, we call this therapeutic communication. It means we look at events from the patient's point of view because that is their reality. If a nurse would look at a clinical situation from his or her own frame of reference, the nurse would not be helpful. Then the patient's concern goes unanswered. So when a patient says, I am in pain, the nurse does not say, oh, you already had your dose 2 hours ago. Instead, the good nurse says, tell me about your pain. As a nurse, it was natural for me to listen to patients' views when I did a research study taking Bruce Grayson's near-death event scale to patients whose hearts had stopped and we had resuscitated them. I talked with patients who had near-death experiences as measured on the Grayson scale, and this research is published in the Journal of Near-Death Studies. In recent decades, the packaging of death has changed dramatically. We actually have more people to talk to about their near-death experiences. Advances in technology have allowed people to arrive at that edge of death to be pulled back quickly by medical intervention. Because so many people receive vital treatment so quickly, their mental faculties are not impaired. They return and they can tell us stories that in the past were lost to death, to brain damage, or to fear of even talking about them. So what are near-death experiencers saying? Those who have returned from near-death events give a report of a realm that coexists with our physical world. Their reports show similar experiences. When the perilous event occurred, could be a car accident, a heart attack, a war injury. These survivors went out of their bodies and floated above the scene. They had no pain. They were surprised that they could look down and watch the scene below, see their loved ones, hear what their loved ones said. The near-death experiencers talked about travel through a tunnel toward a light that enveloped them in love. Some of the near-death experiencers called this light a light being who accepted them with unconditional love. Near-death experience travelers also spoke of meeting family and friends and watching a playback of key events in their lives. The near-death experiencers said there was no language. No language was needed. Everyone's thoughts were understood. Some of the questions asked in the review of deeds are, what have you done with your life so far to show me? How have you used your talents? Who did you love the most? What events made you grow the most? When did you turn around and help a person who had wronged you? I call these the Golden Rule review of deeds because the questions really focus on how a person has treated others. What we do for others counts. The light being accepts people as they are, something human beings have a hard time doing. The light being forgives us for what musician Warren Zevon said are our dirty, rotten deeds. Many near-death experiencers recall they must go back. Some are given a reason. Most often the reason is because they need to help another person. As was discussed earlier today, experiencers are known to become more spiritual after their experience. Death gives them a new awareness on life. They talk about an increased awareness of God as universal. I had a patient tell me, God is too big for any one religion. The near-death experience may bring about the concept I call post-death growth. Near-death experiencers are open to new, less self-centered activities. They often want to help people more than they did before they had the near-death event. One said to me, Sue, I'm nicer now. Little things that used to bother me just don't bother me anymore. We know that spiritual growth comes in ways and at times we least expect. After a near-death experience is one of those times. Well then, what are the dying saying on their deathbeds? Patients in the end stages of dying say things that parallel what the near-death experiencers are saying. The dying can see across the divide between realms. For them, the veil between life and death is lifted, and they talk to people on the other side. Spend some quiet time with someone dying, and you will hear them talking to people you cannot see. Their conversations focus on joining the other person. They say, I'm almost ready. I will be there soon. They say that they see and hear spirits who, by all accounts, have come to actually help them cross over. The terminally ill often predict with firmness and accuracy that they really know their death is coming soon. We professionals, despite all the diagnostic tests we do and all the monitors we have, are often surprised when the event occurs. When I was a coronary care nurse, which is another intensive care place, but this is for patients with heart attacks and heart failure mostly, a probable heart attack victim, and we'll call her Laura Keller, was admitted to the coronary care unit. She was settled in a 2-bedroom and hooked up to a machine that showed her heart rhythm on a monitor. I had inserted an intravenous line in case she would need emergency drugs. We were running the usual blood tests to confirm the suspected diagnosis. Nothing actually seemed particularly out of order in this case. I later learned that Ms. Keller was preparing herself to die. On her first night shift, I was her night nurse. I noticed she wasn't sleeping well. At 2:30 a.m., I went in her room and asked her how she was feeling. Physiologically, she looked good. Her blood pressure and heart rhythm were normal, but she had a need. She calmly asked me if I could arrange for her to be given communion. This was at a Catholic hospital to which a priest was assigned for every shift in case the person wanted communion. In the middle of the night, though, it pushes it a little, okay? She was polite when she asked me. She wasn't ranting and raving. It seemed like a coherent request. She looked at me, grabbed my hand, and said, "I really would like to have communion." Father Mike was 73 years old. He was not happy when I called him in the middle of the night. But he came every morning for all the years I worked there and gave communion. So giving communion was important to him. He said, "Tell her I'll be there in the morning." He was firm. I replied, "She wants you now, Father." "But she's not on the seriously ill list," said Father Mike. "She is," were the words in my mouth that came out as I took a pen and wrote her name on the bottom of the seriously ill list. It really startled me that I could be so bold to do that. Lying to a priest I am hoping is covered under the dirty, rotten deed thing that we're going to be forgiven for. Father Mike said, "You already woke me up, I'll be over." Laura Keller received her communion about 3:30 that morning. She slept afterward. At 6:30, we learned later on autopsy, an aneurysm, a blood vessel, had burst. No amount of CPR or cardiopulmonary drugs could bring her back. Reviewing the deathbed scene and putting things together, I look back at my time with Laura Keller. I am happy I was able to help her have her last wish. I am not happy that I subjected her to all the CPR and every drug in the emergency cart. I am glad that now people are able to choose if they want to have CPR or if they do not. After coming to one of my talks about the veil of life being lifted, a nurse shared this experience with me. She called her patient Mildred. Mildred's 90 years old. She's at the hospital. The nurse has to check on her every hour because her blood pressure keeps falling. Entering the room the first time, the nurse asked, "How are you feeling?" Mildred replied, "Oh, I'm fine. Mom and Pop are here with me." The nurse said she saw no one present beside Mildred and her, but she let it go at that. Each time the nurse went in and checked on the patient was talking to people that weren't in the room. She was talking about going to the other side. She was saying, "I'm done waiting. I will be there soon." On the nurse's last check, the patient had died. The nurse said that if she had known then what she knows now, that dying patients may have conversations with relatives and friends on the other side, she might have been more helpful. She said, "I might have said, 'It seems like you are being well taken care of.'" So we learned several recurring themes from deathbed talks. People on their deathbeds commonly focus their gaze at a corner at ceiling height. They talk about being in the presence of the dead. Dad and Mom are here with me. They talk about preparing and later being ready to travel. "I'll be ready soon. I'm coming." They're in another world stating, "I see the light. It's so beautiful. I see angels waiting for me. As was mentioned this morning, the dying on their deathbeds may become lucid one last time. It's not unusual for family members and nursing personnel to report that a patient who hadn't sat up in weeks sat up in bed, smiled, an incredibly peaceful and happy smile, and then without a word, died. For family members left behind, this smile is a sign that their loved one is all right, just all right somewhere else. Deathbed talk tells us that people learn. They can find meaning up to and through the death event. Yes, within our final entrance, we may still have lessons to learn. Steve Jobs' final words were something like, "Wow, wow." Do you think he might have been seeing something he didn't expect? When I was a director in a long-term care facility, I taught my nursing personnel about near-death events and edge-of-bed death talks. The staff began to notice when a patient was talking to someone on the other side. They called in families so the family could see how the loved one was preparing to die. There is no better sentiment than a loved one feels that where their loved one is going is a good place. Seeing this play out helped many a family member to grieve in a good way. One of the nursing assistants worked the 4 to 8 p.m. shift. Her routine was to help a patient with dementia get ready for bed at 7:30 every night. One evening, the nursing assistant brought the patient back to her room, and the patient with dementia said, "I don't want to go in my room." The patient pointed across the hall at ceiling height and said, "See the angels? I want to stay up and watch the angels." The nursing assistant saw nothing, and to no avail could convince her to let her help her to bed. So the next day it's 4 p.m. and the nursing assistant comes back to work. The staff is in turmoil. A patient had tried to get out of her bed, tried to go over the side rail, and the ties of her nightgown got caught. She choked and suffocated from the railing. The room of the patient who died was directly across the hall from the room of the patient with dementia who would not go to bed. It makes one wonder, is anyone really alone when they die? So you can see what patients say at the end of death parallels what you know near-death experiencers are saying. Spirits may exist without any physical form. They have no pain. They may view and clearly hear what is going on when they are out of their bodies. They may bring messages to the living. They may sense when death is near. Spiritual connections. In the end, this is what really matters. Spiritual relationships. Funny, they're hard to measure. Sometimes what we can count in life doesn't really count, and what we can't count does. Now we can use the facts learned from the near-death experiencers and the dying patients to console the ones left behind. When families come to the emergency room and find out that their loved one has died, the most frequent question they ask is, did my loved one suffer pain when they died? You know the answer to that one. We can answer that one with certainty. Reports from motor vehicle accident victims, people fleeing dangerous situations, being on the battlefield, concur that when a person goes from their body form to their spirit form, all pain ceases. This is a near-death fact that you and I know and can use to comfort those who grieve. You and I also know that when people leave their bodies, they're often met on the other side by loved ones. We can again share this near-death fact to console families who can actually picture then Gee, who is there to meet my loved one? For a while, I was a spiritual care and death nurse at a university hospital. This meant I met ambulances. Thank you. The family that I met had usually been told that their loved one had died or was surely going to die. The scene was horrible. I struggled at first with what I could say to console them. Those who lost loved ones most often met me with a vacant stare. They rocked back and forth, back and forth. They shuddered. They wailed. They pounded on the walls. Parents who lost children were the worst off. Their loss was like a bloody, gaping wound. No one could fix that. One particular evening got me started using the words of near-death experiences and the dying to help those who grieve. I was in the ER with parents who had just been told their child had died at the babysitter's house. The coroner had given a preliminary diagnosis of sudden infant death syndrome. The parents were given a private area. The mother would not make eye contact with anyone. She bent her body, curling it forward into a ball as she cried. She rocked back and forth, back and forth. The father stared forward, like he was looking at something that I couldn't see. I was kneeling on the floor next to a chaplain who also met the parents. The rocking and the wailing continued. No one really talked at all in the beginning. I know I was thinking, what can I possibly say to console people who have lost a child? When the crying let up, I explained how people who were resuscitated said that dying was not painful, and I hoped this message would comfort them. The family did not immediately respond, so I couldn't tell. We still had no eye contact with this family. Weeping again filled the space until the father looked up and said, "I'm glad Jenny did not have pain at the end." All of us except the mother nodded. The mother was still rocking and wailing and gave us no eye contact. I took another chance and filled the gap by talking more about what I had been told by those who had died and returned to life. I mentioned that near-death experiencers tell us that they were welcomed by family and friends on the other side. Only at that time did the mother finally look up, and she said to her husband, "Do you think your mother met Jenny?" The father took his wife in his arms and said, "Yes, that is probably what happened." So because of my knowledge and my acceptance of near-death experiences, this family learned that their child died not alone and in no pain. Glimpses of death shared with me were now helping a family with a world that was unknown to them. Perhaps that is one of the reasons near-death experiences occur, so others touched by death might be comforted. While I was a director of nursing, a staff member experienced the death of his child. In his sympathy card, I enclosed 3 little index cards containing facts about death that we nurses know. Some of these truths came from listening to the dying. Other facts were from my readings and research on near-death events. Several days after receiving the cards, the man came back and asked me, "Could I have 3 more cards?" I'm like, "Okay," by the end of the day. He said, "They really helped me." I gave him 3 more cards. He returned again 3 days later, and he said, "My wife and I read your cards together. We'd love to read any others that you have." Now, I didn't have a stockpile of index cards here, So every night I was writing to try and keep ahead so that this family had a card a day. I wrote more cards for him and his wife, and later he came back and said, "Your cards mimic exactly what we're feeling. How do you know what we're feeling?" For 1 year, I wrote daily facts about death for this family to read. Gradually, I changed from the index card to word processing because I could do that faster. And the family has a binder of all the little index cards and the pieces of word processing in a notebook. I wrote special messages for holidays and for his birthday because that was a very difficult time for the family. The son was a guitarist. He had played with his father and his brother in a band. Father gave me his music to listen to, so I'd shut my office door and blare it and just try and meditate and think about what to say next to this family. I did not realize at the time, but I was becoming the scribe, connecting this family who lost a child with the voices of people who had near-death experiences and the voices of people as they crossed over into death. There was no intention on my part to write a book. This is the book. But indeed, that's how Good Grief Daily Meditation got started, literally one day at a time. In turn, I was learning from the family. They were showing me that creating a time and space for such remembrance was healing. So I continued sharing factual information in each meditation, but also added affirmations, words of lament, forgiveness, words of wonderment, words that this man and woman could use to express what they were feeling, words that they couldn't find on their own. The man also used meditations to talk with his son at graveside. This brought a new dimension to daily meditations. The man said he feared others looking at him would think that he was just plain crazy. I said, let's face it, we all talk to loved ones who have died. It's a normal thing. Heaven knows they can hear us. Where others were telling this family to accept the loss of their son and move on, I was saying, let go of letting go of your loved one. Remember him. Think about you and him, your relationship, and how his death is forcing you to reflect on life. Talk to him and you will know in your mind what he would say. When someone is no longer with us physically, they continue to influence us. We feel their presence. I do not doubt, as you probably do not doubt, that we communicate with spirits beyond life. I routinely see relief on mourners' faces when they are told they don't just have to accept the loss, bury it, and move on. The couple later wrote to me, though your writings often make us cry, they say things that are hard for us to express. The pain of losing our son is almost unbearable at times, but it is comforting to know there is someone who truly understands. You have taken us a step beyond grief. So Good Grief Daily Meditations, with its language of grief, has emerged then from the collective voices of people who had near-death experiencers, the dying on their deathbeds, and those who shared their griefs with me. The words came from their hearts. Simple words, tender truths revealing what was in their hearts and minds. Just ordinary words strung together in a language of grief. And I was just the scribe. The conversations these parents shared with their son made grief for them less complicated. And that was because they no longer needed to hide their feelings. Now each new day, they had words to say and to reflect on while communing with their son. They were comforted by the language of grief. At some time or another, we all grieve. We are told that there are certain ways we should grieve. We have been taught the stages of Elisabeth Kubler-Ross, a brilliant physician who studied the dying and how the dying, as they neared their own death, went through anger, denial, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance of their own death. Our society has assumed that mourners take the same steps as those who are dying. Our society has assumed that mourners must accept their loss. You and I, because of what we know, can free mourners from the notion that connection with their loved one is wrong. The connection is not ended. You and I can bring families to a place where they not only understand how death was for their loved one, but also how they can dialogue with that loved one. We can bring mourners the words to reach out to deceased loved ones, talk to them, and feel their presence, feel them enjoying their memories. Communication with and about the deceased allows a mourner to better understand what a loved one brought to their life. Just as grievers learn how deeply a person affected them, so too do they understand the significance of how they acted toward that person who died. So I'm going to share a few pages. I put a near-death fact on the top of each of what I'm going to show you, but that is not how the book is written. I put it there to reinforce with you that, hey, you know that fact. Could you say to somebody, your body may be buried or the dust from your bones sent off into the wind, your spirit, however, remains independent from your body? If you told that to somebody who's grieving, I think you could do it. Then the affirmation, knowing that at death the spirit survives comforts me. This knowledge assures me that you and I will always be connected. I am keeping you on my mind and in my heart. Okay, another one. You know this. You know we become a spirit at death. To think we change into forms of being we cannot fully understand is perplexing, but true. You could say that to somebody. And then you could give them an affirmation. You are in my heart. I tell myself that you do still exist. I believe you exist as a spirit. I do not know how far my story on earth will go, but I will meet up with you. Until then, keep me in your heart. I would feel better knowing that you do. Again, fact is, we know there are a spirit form at death. Once a person is pronounced dead, most people end their conversations. We do not talk to people who have died. The dead see what's going on. We know that dying people hear what is happening around them. How odd it is that we behave as if the person who has died cannot see or hear us. I always thought it was fun when a nurse would run into a meeting and drag me out of it because they thought the patient might have died, but they weren't sure. So I would go into the room to confirm that death had happened, but I would always be talking with the person, mentioning how they looked, mentioning how I was going to make their body comfortable. It took a long time for my staff to understand they could still talk to someone who had just died. Go into, you know there is no pain at death. You could say that to someone. When the departed were out of their bodies, all their pain was suspended. What a wonderful thing to know. The answer to the most common question asked in the ER. And I'm going to just go to the last one, and you can read these in the book, to show you that death gives us a new awareness. Death brings a new level. We reach the understanding that time on earth is a limited part of our life. But your death awakened me. Before I thought only about my day-to-day existence. Now I am becoming a spirit you would be proud to know. So hey, take up the challenge. Spread what you know about near-death experience and what you just learned about people at the edge of death. Thank you.